Okay, we're going to continue today a little bit of an offshoot of Thursday's share about Turkey, which was about Mesorah and Kashrus, and we'll talk a little bit more about Mesorah and Kashrus with a very interesting animal. So to start like this, there are two. I printed out this article. It was actually in Mishpacha magazine, but there are two doctors. One is Dr. Ari Zivotofsky, I think his name is, and Dr. Ari Greenspan. One is a brain science doctor in Bar Ilan University, and one of them is a practicing dentist in Yerushalayim. They have an obsession with food and kashrus, and they've basically single-handedly uncovered all sorts of different species and minim of foods that technically by the book should be kosher, meaning simanim-wise, characteristics-wise, they should be kosher animals, but either due to their availability or due to them being disgusting or something in between are not something that people eat commonly. And they, in 2002, organized what they called the first Mesorah dinner. Not the Art Scroll got none of the proceeds. It was Mesorah as in Mesorah of these animals. And they spent months and months and months collecting all sorts of odd creatures from all over the world. But the problem is that in order to allow someone to eat an animal that is kosher on paper, but doesn't have a Mesorah of kashrus, you have to find a person who could tell you verbally and by writing that he recognizes this animal, and based on its simanim, it's an animal that he has seen eaten in the past, and then he's able to transmit that Mesorah further. Now, exactly, if we're seimach on this, we're not seimach on this, is a shaila in the Paiskim, but there is plenty to work with, where there's something called where you could transmit a Mesorah, you could, share a Mesorah from group to group. So they went around the whole world to all different segments of Klal Yisrael, and they found old sheikhtim, old stam people who ate, one of their main influences, they said, is they met Rabbi Moshe Tendler, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's son-in-law, and he told them that he remembers, vividly how his mother used to cook chal. Now, chal is cow udder. And basically, Chazal and Gemara Chulin say that chal tastes like basar b'chalav, because it's full of milk. Now, there's a special way to prepare it. You have to make an X across it, and you dry it on a wall. The melicha of chal is a whole siman in Shulchan Aruch. And because of how complicated it is and how full of bacteria it is, I think, and unavailable, it became something that wasn't common to eat. But Rabbi Tendler told him that he remembers as a child eating chal, and it was, delicious, and they should find out. So they have Rabbi Tendler for chal, and so on and so forth. They went and found an old Iraqi family who used to eat quail eggs. And then they went and hunted down, thousands of quail eggs and made quail egg soup. Then they found clipfish and swordfish, and they put together a dinner that they said it was basically a dinner shiur. It was a 6-hour dinner with 20 shiurim, 20 lectures from different people presenting each food. And they ate like this whole... in the article, they write that they worked very, very hard to try to get a hold of giraffe. And they even spoke to people who eat giraffe, and giraffe that's tasty is young giraffe, like baby giraffe. The veal of giraffe is tasty because when they get bigger, they're so muscular that the meat is very tough and it's not enjoyable to eat. So they looked for young giraffe, but that they weren't able to find. They ate elk, they ate deer. They really put together a fine dinner that they called the first Mesorah dinner in 2002. After that, they a couple of several dozen entrepreneurial individuals with iron stomachs who came to participate in eating this. They had the list. It's like each one's stranger than the next. And then after that, in 2004 and 2005, the OU made a Mesorah dinner in conjunction with them. The CRC made a Mesorah dinner in conjunction with them. Other kashrus agencies, the chief rabbinate of Eretz Yisroel made one in conjunction with them. A lot of the kashrus agencies got involved to try to shore this up, to include themselves in it. I think the CRC from Chicago, which is a very yeshivish almost kashrus organization, made one of these dinners in the United States, where they got together all these things. So they, I'm just thinking now, they also had this type of bread, an Ethiopian bread, like a soft bread, which is made out of an Ethiopian grain that we don't have a Mesorah for it being called from the Chameshes Haminim, that you have to make hamaitzi on. So the shir was that you have to make hamaitzi on the Ethiopian bread. For dessert, they had locusts. They had fried glazed locusts for dessert. I mean, it was a wild meal. Now, Shema Taimar, that this is a few brave, maybe somewhat odd individuals who have, a particular palate that they're trying to indulge in and that they want to, really push the limits with the Mesorah. So I want to tell you that the core shilas that undergird this question of eating al pi Mesorah and all these animals is something that was in probably, 80% of the chalent bowls in Eretz Yisroel in 2004. Now, and I'll tell you how. In 2004, there was a huge tumult in the kashrus world in Eretz Yisroel, where basically people became aware that the animals, the gases that they were bringing from South America, all the meat that was coming from South America, was a certain strain of cattle called zebu. It's called Indian ox, it's called zebu with a C or zebu with a Z. You could spell it different ways. Where basically they became aware that all the meat, all the cattle that's being consumed in Eretz Yisroel comes from zebu meat. Or not directly zebu meat, but is a pale yotze of zebu meat. It's from the zebu family of meat. And this stirred up a huge controversy. And it was I think it was Parshas Parah, rather, which is ironic. It was good for the newspapers at the time. Every newspaper in Eretz Yisrael wrote about it. On Parshas Parah, on Erev Shabbos, Parshas Parah, they became aware that all the meat was treif, and all the tefillin that was written on the skin of these animals is not menamoter beficha, and all the the sinews that were used to be teifer sefer Torah are not kosher because it was made from these animals. You have to kasher your pots. It became a tremendous tumult. What to do with the zebu? Is it kosher? Is it not kosher? And Rabbi Yashiv invited Reb Nissen Karelitz, and together they made a Moshe Bezdin to figure out what to do. And Shmuel Vosner wrote a tshuva about it, and etc. But before we say what they said in 2004, let's actually explain what the shaila of all these funny foods without a Mesorah, and b what the particular shaila of zebu is, and we'll work our way back to 2004. So the original shaila of zebu is as follows: in 1950. When Eretz Yisroel had just, become a place of yishuv, a place of people to live, and there was a big population, they became aware of a problem with Israeli cattle farming and agriculture. Israel's climate and natural resources don't lend themselves to producing fatty cattle. You need very sturdy type of cattle that could survive the Israeli climate and the Israeli what they eat. It's a specific breed that could survive it. A regular, Black Angus American beef is not going to do well. A Wagyu strain of Wagyu beef is not going to do well in Eretz Yisrael. It won't be able to fatten up the way it needs. So they did research. The people who are involved in agriculture did research, and they found that there's a specific type of cattle called the Indian ox. It's called the zebu cattle. That's a very hardy cattle. It does very well. It has no problem surviving in these type of arid and semi-arid climates. It could do very well. Now, what makes the zebu cattle distinctive is that it looks like a cow, but right before the neck, it has a grizzly bear hump. On the back of the neck, it has a big clump of fat right above its shoulder blades that could come up, let's say, 6 inches, 8 inches, a sizable clump of fat on its shoulder blades. That's what differentiates the zebu from other cows. Otherwise, internally, it's exactly like a cow. It looks like a cow, walks like a cow, talks like a cow. It's a cow. But it has this hump that makes it look different. So now the shaila was sent to Rav Herzog, the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisroel at that time, in 1950, by the Bezdin of Paris. Now, the particulars of the shaila was the Bezdin of Paris found a cattle farmer in Madagascar that they felt could produce meat for them, that they could sell in Eretz Yisroel, and the strain of the meat was zebu. So now they sent the shaila to Rav Herzog. What is the halacha in regards to eating the zebu cattle? Is it permitted? Is it asur? So Rav Herzog has tshuvas about it, and he has he has his own angle of dealing with it. Where basically, let's just say the shmuz. So the shmuz is as follows. The din is as follows. The Torah, when it tells us the animals that are kosher, the Torah gives us a list. It tells us simanim. It says an animal that chews its cud and that has split hoofs, that's a pasuk in the Torah, mefurish 2 times, is kosher. And then the Torah gives us a list of 10 different animals, which Chazal and Chulin and Daf and Tes tell us 3 of them are behemoths and 7 of them are chayas. There are only 3 kosher behemoths in the world. It's a cow, a sheep, and a goat. Those are the only 3 kosher behemoths in the world. And there are 7 kosher chayas in the world, like, a deer, etc. 7 kosher chayas. Now, this doesn't mean that there are only 10 animals that could eat, because obviously a cow could be divided down into 100 species, and a sheep could be divided down into 100 species. And these are the avi avois. There are 10 avi avois that are kosher. Now, the Gemara in Chulin, the Mishnah in Chulin, tells us as follows. It says that simane behema v'chaya nemru min ha-Torah. The simanim of a behema and a chaya are told midiraisa. They told us in the Torah, and so that's the Mishnah. So Chazal say Tanar Rabbanon, Elu Simani Behema, Kol Behema Mafresas Parsa. Okay, that's very simple. Malagera v'shesas v'mafresas parsa is considered a behema that's tahira. Very simple, very straightforward in the Gemara. Then the Gemara continues on and it tells us that there's a way to be able to check. And this is just interesting to know that the way an animal, any animal who chews its cud, does not have front incisors. The front teeth, like in the mouth, on the top of the mouth, it's missing those teeth. There's only one exception that Chazal say that has those teeth, and it's still a kosher animal, still chews its cud, and that's a camel, a baby camel. A baby camel chews its cud. It's not a kosher animal. Chews its cud, but doesn't have those incisors. So if you find a baby camel, you could be confused, meaning if you don't know. So you have to know the siman, like about the hoofs also. And the Gemara vice versa gives you one exception to something that has hoofs like a kosher animal, but doesn't chew its cud like a kosher animal. But Chazal knew a full comprehensive list, and they say it doesn't exist anything different than this. This is the kosher sign. Then the Gemara winds off onto the Simani Chaya. What defines the 7 chayas, the 7 non-domesticated animals that are kosher? What defines them? And the Gemara starts giving simanim, and it talks about their horns. And it says it has to have karnayim that are mefutzalos, horns that are like split, like a deer's horns are split off. Then the Gemara gives other simanim, horns that are layered, horns that are hollow, horns. It's many simanim that lead to many machlekes rishayim, to the point where we don't really know what the simanim of a chaya's horns are supposed to look like. Now, there's many nafkaminas and halacha between something being a chaya and a behema. Granted, they're both kosher for eating, but lamashal, kisei adam, for example. You only do kisei adam on a chaya or a knife. On a behema, you don't do kisei adam. Chelev, for example. Chelev of a behema is aser, of a chaya is okay. Oisiv espinoi, the isser to shecht an animal and its child on the same day, only negay by a behema, by a chaya that's not negay. By karbanis there's more, by nedarim there's more. There's about 10 nafkaminas between being a chaya and a behema that are relevant based on these simanim of what the horns look like. Now, in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Pei, the Shulchan Aruch says as follows. It starts as follows: Chaya tahira, chalba mutter, v'dama aser. A chaya tahira, its chelev is mutter, its dam is aser, v'toan kisei, it needs kisei adam. V'chachamim nasnu simanim mipi hashmua b'karnei seah. Chazal and Chulin and Daf Test gave all sorts of simanim based on its horns as to what's kosher or not. If it's mefutzel or not. That's what the Mechaber says in Sif Aleph over here. So if you read the Mechaber, play it straight up, you would think that provided that you could go through the Sugya and Chulin and Daf Test very well and figure out what exactly mefutzalis means and what the conditions of the horns are that we're looking for, you could know what's a chaya, what's a behema. They're both, of course, kosher, but they have different nafkaminas la'alacha, and you could fear with them as you deal with them. Now, there's one cryptic line in the Shach over here that starts the whole ball rolling. The Shach writes as follows. The Shach says, Ayin pirushim shel dvarim elu bebeis Yosef. What exactly karnayim ufutzalos are? What exactly split horns means? Ulefisha ein lanu ata l'masha kibalnu b'meseiras. Since today we only have what we makabel b'meseira, ukid l'kaman simin pei beis, gabi simani ha'oif, which is what we spoke about on Thursday. So kitzarti, says the Shach. I'm not going to bother going into what exactly the terms and conditions of karnayim ufutzalos is, because we only eat something that has meseira anyhow. So now, what does that mean? The Shach just threw in a tremendous wrench over here. If you come somewhere and you find an animal, you find, let's say, an elk. Okay, an elk has perfectly split hoofs. It chews its cud. It has all the stomach compartments that a kosher animal is supposed to have, and it even has karnayim ufutzalos, according to some days. It has big horns. Now, but you don't really know. Now, according to the Shach, are you allowed to eat that elk or not allowed to eat that elk? So this becomes a huge tumult. The Prima Gadim, Afanart, the Prima Gadim says that the Shach says that you're not allowed to, that we're Saimach on Meseira, says the Prima Gadim. He says that's only in regards to establishing it as a chaya. In regards to giving it the particular set of dinim that a chaya has, the unique dinim that a chaya has, you need to have a Meseira in it that it's a chaya. If you don't have a Meseira in it that's a chaya, so it's chaylev is also just like an animal, you don't do kisei adam, misafik, you can't, it has dinim of an animal, misafik. That's what the Prima Gadim learns the Shach, which would mean that if a person came to the location, he finds an animal that has split hoofs and chews its cud, whether or not he knows it's a chaya or it's not a chaya, he could shecht it like a behema and treat it as a suffix, treat it like a koi, like a kvi, a koi, however you pronounce it, treat it like that. It's a suffix, you do what you do with it, and that's it. That's what the Prima Gadim says. Comes along the Chachmas Adam, who's one of the G'dalei HaPaiskim of Lita, a mechutin of the Gain, comes along the Chachmas Adam. The Chachmas Adam writes as follows. Chachmas Adam says, "Ulefisha einanu oichlin." We only eat. See, pay attention to that word. Lefisha einanu oichlin. We only eat. Masha kibalnu b'meseres me'aveseinu. What we accepted in a Meseira from our forefathers. Kidla kaman sifvav. V'imkein aser lanu lechel min hachaya. It's aser to us to eat from a chaya rak hatzvi shenikar lanu. Only a deer that we know it exists. We know that our grandparents ate it. V'lechein lo hitakti asimanim. I didn't bother bringing down the simanim of karnayim, of utzalos, and etc. But right to lay that someone wants to know yimtzim shulchan aruch siman ayin tes siman pei. Take a look. You could go research the sugya if you want. I'm not bringing it down. It's not negei l'maisa. So the Chachmas Adam seems to be learning that line in the Shach a whole different way. Chachmas Adam is saying we only eat what we have Messiah on. So now, according to Chachmas Adam, what the Shach is saying is that unless you know that this animal was eaten by your forefathers, by your grandparents, whatever it is, even if it presents with regular simanim, it has split hoofs, it chews its cud, it does everything perfectly as is, but you don't have Messiah in eating it, you can't eat it. That's what Chachmas Adam is taking out of the Shach. I mean, the Pri Megadim takes out a much more narrowly tailored message. If you don't know the Messiah that it's a chaya, you can't treat it as a chaya. But of course it's a kosher animal, because kosher animals are said in the Torah straight up, tells us exactly what it is. Chachmas Adam says it much more broad. We only eat what we have Messiah on, just like by birds. Even though we spoke last week, birds is unique. Birds, the Gemara says, Nachal Messiah. Birds, Rashi says eat Messiah. This starts in a Shach, one brand new line, the Shach says it, and that's how the Chachmas Adam interprets it. So, and additionally, the Aruch HaShulchan, in Siman Pei Sif Yod, he also says, Ach zeh hakol ledina, ulemaisa he says, Einanu seimchem al simanim she'einanu bekiyim behem. We're not seimach on different simanim that we're not bucking in them. Ve'ein chaya nechel, ele b'meseiris. K'may she'yitzvar b'siman pei beis ba'ifas ayin shal. We only eat what's given to us from Messiah, nothing else. So, based on this two ways how to read the Shach, started a huge machlekes. Rav Herzog in his tshuva writes that it's pashut to him that of course an animal that has chews its cud and has split hoofs is a kosher animal. No problem, you could eat it, it's kosher. You want to know if it's a chaya or not? Okay, I can't tell you if it's a chaya. We don't really know the simanim of a chaya so well. But of course you could eat the zebu and go for it. This should be a great strain to bring into Eretz Yisroel. This would be a great future for agriculture and cattle grazing in Eretz Yisroel. And Ad Kedei Kach, where he goes with most of his tshuva, the tshuva is like, he put out a kuntras called Kuntras Pnei Hashar. It's like a 20-page kuntras, and most of the kuntras is about how terrible it is to aser things that aren't aser. And that's like what he's busy with. He's not busy with, meaning the first few paragraphs he starts off with the shaila, which to him is a simple, open shut shaila. It's basically mafurish in the Gemara and the Rishonim and Shulchan Aruch that it's kosher, and it's a terrible thing to aser things that aren't aser. It's bal taisif, it's leisasur, it's bad policy, bad public policy. It's a whole tshuva about that. Comes along the Chazon Ish and a few little tshuvas, and Rav Herzog wrote to the Chazon Ish to get the Chazon Ish's shtempel. Rav Herzog considered the Chazon Ish to be the Paisek Hadar, the Gadol Hadar of the time, and he wrote to the Chazon Ish to get the Chazon Ish's shtempel. And the Chazon Ish didn't see it quite that way. The Chazon Ish writes as follows. The Chazon Ish, it's printed in here, in Rav Herzog's Sefer he printed it, but it's also now today in the Chazon Ish in Yeridei, in the end of Siman Yud Aleph, in Yeridei, the Chazon Ish has these two tshuvas, and he writes as follows. Achrei sheyadua, since it's well known, he says, Kam hechmiru rabbeinu rishonim v'achreinim zal, shalei lifrei together shagadu rishonim. We know how seriously charedim take being pirate together. We don't break open things that our fathers and forefathers before us did. We shouldn't turn away from the words of the Chachmas Adam. Don't turn away from this that the Chachmas Adam writes, that we don't eat behemoths and chayas unless we have Messiah. Like the Chachmas Adam interpreted the Shach, which is the simple, straightforward way to read the Shach, not the way the Pri Megadim read the Shach. Now, and then he fears ice, and he says, L'didan asr mishum minag, and this is a big chiddush that the Chazon Ish says. He says, L'didan, for our circles, he says, asr mishum minag shekavu b'chachmas adam, v'sifrei espashet b'dari b'chol eretz lita. He says, as far as we're concerned, it's looked at as a minig, that the Chachmas Adam was kaveya, that it's asr to eat these animals without Messiah. And he says, I don't have to tell you that the Chachmas Adam was nisfashet all over Lita. He was the Paisik of Lita, the Paisik Hadar of Lita. So if he made such a kviyas, then that's the kviyas and it's a minig. Aval Iker, he says, not only is it just a minig, Aval Iker shedivrei hashach ein kipir shel Chachmas Adam. I also agree that the Chachmas Adam learned the Shach the right way. He says, Ve'en lifritz gedem b'mnagim shel Yisrael, ve'en lanu shum hechrach l'zeh, ve'dai lanu b'bakar b'tzayin sheb Messiah. It's enough. We'll eat what we have. We don't have to eat things that we don't have a klar Messiah for. We have a psak and a minig from the Chachmas Adam not to eat anything that doesn't have Messiah. Then there's a Haisafa from a later letter where he writes, Achrei shahar b'medinas mevi'im bakar menachotz, Yisrael kedoshim shayu prushim Says, yeah, other cultures import animals from all over the world. They eat all sorts of things. But Yisrael, Kadesh Meim, our minig is we don't import, we don't eat different things. Another letter he writes, Nifgashti, I bumped into over here, he says, the Chazon Ish sometimes writes like poetry. It's a few lines. It says, Nifgashti b'shayli yisaydis shall kol hatzibur. I bumped into a shayla that's relevant to every Jew. Im nog etzleinu minig kavua meraviseinu haga'onim shleilachal behem rak m'seiris, k'may ba'oifei loi. P'nei shezeh inyan rav ha'erech, r'tzeinu l'shmei. He continues, and he says, it's pashut, that there was a minig, and this is where the Chazon Ish introduces something that's like a chiddush. Nobody else really knows where he gets this from. He says, "V'tzarich leimar." He says, "It must be." He says, he doesn't know this to be historically true. He says, "It must be v'tzarich leimar. Dahi pashet lehem minig hazeh v'hadar shal hashachar yadar shal chachamim gedolim habezdin shal chelkas Yaakov hagayni b'shua Heschel Rabbani Aglilis v'chol Yisrael haynishmam lam alpiyim." All of Klal Yisrael would have been bound to adhere to the gzeiros of the bezdin of the shach and the chelkas mechaykik and b'shua Heschel and etc. So al piyam yatzu al piyam bo v'hayasima slave al kol minig. He says it's pashut that the shach already, his bezdin, made a gzeira not to eat any animals that don't have meseira. So the Chazon Ish, out of this one line in the shach and this one line in the Chacham Sadim, builds out an entire Torah of like a gzeira and a history of the gzeira, and says that eating any animal that doesn't have a meseira, a clear meseira, is asur midin this shach, midin this Chacham Sadim. Now the Chazon Ish felt so strongly about his position on this matter that he, during the time when this was raging, when this battle was raging in 1950, Rabbi Yaakov Edelstein, the Rav of Ramat HaSharon, Rav Gershon Edelstein's older brother, he writes in one of his svarim that the Chazon Ish called him in. He was close with the Chazon Ish. He asked him to come in, and he gave him a small zettel with Mar Mekaymis on the sugya. It said l'chvayd. I think there was only two Rosh Yeshivas Sapanovich at that time. Rav Shach wasn't there yet. It was Rav Shmuel Rozovsky and Rav David Varaski, exactly. Rav Shach wasn't there yet. He sent them the letter l'chvayd hagrash v'hagrad with about 5 mar mekaymis on the sugya of why zebu was aser. No lidrish as elifnei talmidim. The Chazon Ish sent him like a mar mekaymis sheet to the Reshivas. Please spread the word that the way this is the psak. This is how it has to be. So now at the time it was considered kind of settled. The Chazon Ish, who was Taka the God Ladar, the Pesach Hadar, had placed his weight on the scale in a very, very heavy-handed manner, and he said clearly that zebu shouldn't be eaten, and zebu fell off the table. It wasn't a shmuz. Now, unbeknownst to regular people, Al Kapanim, zebu didn't disappear. Zebu was still a very beneficial cattle to have in your gene pool. Meaning, it's a durable cattle. It produces a nice amount of meat per ratio of what you feed it. Meaning, pound for pound, you put in 1,000 pounds of feed, you're going to get back 1,000 pounds of meat. And the bottom line is always the bottom line. And the zebu could survive everywhere. It needs not too much water, not too much food. So what they started doing is instead of just shechting zebu and serving zebu, they would take zebu and another kosher animal, another kosher ox that has a great meseira that everyone ate. They put them together, and the children, and then they'd marry the next child to zebu again, and the next child to zebu again, till you have about 90% zebu gene and a small mix of other genes. And this is something that as science got better, became perfected mamish to the detail, and they took just the right amount of zebu gene and mixed it in with the other cattle, so you have all the benefits of the zebu and none of the chesroinus of the zebu. Zebu happens to have some technical chesroinus also, meaning they were trying to eliminate. The skin sticks to the flesh a little bit, it has some technical things they eliminated, and there's many doctors. I brought a whole bunch of printouts from different doctors, Dr. Shore and Dr. this one and that one, who wrote different write-ups of the exact sugya of crossbreeding the zebu with other animals, to the point where Dr. Shore, he's a frum guy, but I'm just going to quote him, to the point where Dr. Shore says that in his estimation, if the Chazon Ish ate meat from the year 1952 and onward to the end of his life, he almost certainly consumed zebu himself, meaning pal yotze of a zebu. Now, I don't know if the Chazon Ish ate meat, and I don't know where he got his meat from. This is what Dr. Shore says. I'm just quoting it to show you the prevalence, how much this meat made it into the regular kosher market. So now, this went quietly, unnoticed, for years and years and years, until 2004. In 2004, somebody became aware of the fact that we're really all eating zebu, and we're really all in violation of the Chazon Ish's psak, and that started the Parshas Parah. In the Israeli newspapers, the frum newspapers, it was referred to as Shabbat HaShchora, the Black Shabbos, because no one knew if the news came out on Friday afternoon, and the yeshivas threw out their chalents, and Chevron they threw out their chalent, and Panovich they threw out their chalent. Nobody was able to eat their chalent. Nobody knew what to do. It was a huge mevucha. Nobody knew what to do. So Rabbi Yashiv, now back home to where we started, Rabbi Yashiv and Rav Vosner and Rav Nissen put together a bezdin together, where they done, and basically based on a few tzirufim, Rabbi Yashiv held that all the kalim and all the meat that was already in all the Sefer Torah that were written on it, and all the tefillin that was written on it, and all the Sefer Torah that have gidim from it are kosher, no problem. And Rabbi Yashiv felt that the Chazon Ish's psak only applied to zebu itself, not to the zera of zebu, which is only zera ha'av, is itself a very complicated sugya, like how zera gets diluted, and the zera ha'av of zebu, he says, was not included in the Chazon Ish's zera, the Chazon Ish's iser. So Rabbi Yashiv allowed them to keep going with this and said, no more, don't shecht any zebu. We don't shecht zebu because the Chazon Ish's psak stays. But any zera zebu or mixes of zebu, that's less problematic. And Rabbi Yisrael Auerbach in a tshuva that he wrote, where he explains his shver's position, Rabbi Yisrael writes that his shver felt that although we're kafuf to shtoltzu to the Chazon Ish's psak, the Chazon Ish's psak is the Chazon Ish's psak. He's Rabban Shel Kol Bnei Hagoyim, we're kafuf to shtoltzu to his psak. But overall, the psak of Klal Yisrael is not that we need a Messiah on Chayas and Behemoths. Meaning zebu particularly, we're going to shtoltzu to the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish said zebu we don't eat, so zebu we don't eat. But Klali is the halacha that we don't eat chayas and behemoths unless they have Messiah. In that regard, Klal Yisrael was not makabel this psak, he says. Maybe it's the Chachmas Adam's psak, maybe it's the Shach's psak, but in this regard, Klal Yisrael wasn't makabel the psak. And there are many rayas, and I can't get into them now, that have been compiled by other later meshivim, that you could see that Klal Yisrael was not makabel this psak, whole, as is. So it ended up being that there's kind of this pshara, provided that it's not a zebu in front of you, the place we're not going to make such a problem with it. Rabbi Belsky spoke to Yaakov Kamenetsky about this in his Chuvas. So Rabbi Belsky writes that he spoke to Yaakov, and Yaakov told him to the contrary, the Prima Gadim is the Paisik of Litta. So the Chazon Ish is saying that the Chachmas Adam is the Paisik of Litta, the Prima Gadim is the Paisik of Litta. So, the Shlomo Miller, I think, even has two Chuvas about it. One, he's much more machmer, and the second one, he's much more makel. It's one of these shilas where if a zebu is presented, the answer is going to be we don't eat zebu. But if it's not a zebu, and it's just something that's related to a zebu, a cousin of a zebu, then the psak of not needing a Messiah on these things still seems to be the primary psak. Okay, we're going to take a break from kashrus now. Maybe we'll talk about Chanukah a little next week, and maybe we'll come back.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.